A mafia boss who despises women finds himself addicted to a curvy single mom he can't control. As their dangerous worlds collide, will their forbidden attraction destroy them or save them both? The autumn wind whipped at Vera's face as she hurried down the cracked sidewalk, her fingers tight around Tommy's Spider-Man backpack. Her feet ached from a 12-hour shift of carrying plates and dodging wandering hands. But she couldn't slow down. Not when Tommy was waiting. Street lights flickered to life as the sun dipped behind the weathered apartment buildings. Vera checked her watch and picked up her pace. Mrs. Martinez from next door only watched Tommy until 6, and it was already quarter till. The familiar worry gnawed at her stomach as she climbed the stairs to their third-floor apartment. Every shadow made her jump these days. Every unexpected sound sent her heart racing. Her ex-husband's threats echoed in her mind. "You can't hide forever, Vera." But she pushed those thoughts away as she reached their door. The sound of Tommy's laughter drifted through the thin walls, and some of the tension eased from her shoulders. "Mama!" Tommy launched himself at her legs the moment she stepped inside. His dark curls were wild, his cheeks flushed from playing. "There's my boy." Vera scooped him up, breathing in his sweet smell. No matter how exhausted she was, holding Tommy made everything better. "Were you good for Mrs. Martinez?" "An angel, as always," the elderly woman said, gathering her knitting. He finished all his homework too. After Mrs. Martinez left, Vera made Tommy's favorite mac and cheese while he chattered about his day at school. She soaked in every word, every gesture, storing them like precious gems. Later, as she tucked him into bed, Tommy's small hand found hers. "Mama, are the bad men coming back?" Vera's heart clenched. Even at 6, he was too perceptive. "No, baby. I won't let anyone hurt you. Ever." She had just finished singing his favorite lullaby when 3 sharp knocks echoed through the apartment. Vera froze, her blood turning to ice. The knocks came again, more insistent this time. A shadow moved beneath the door, massive and threatening. Tommy's eyes went wide with fear. "Stay here," Vera whispered, tucking the blanket around him. "Don't make a sound." Her legs felt like lead as she approached the door. Through the peephole, she could make out a tall figure in an expensive suit. Not her ex-husband, but something told her this was worse. Much worse. The man knocked again, and this time, the door trembled in its frame. Luca Moretti studied the photograph in his hand, his jaw tightening as he stared at the image of Vera's ex-husband. The hallway lights cast shadows across his angular face while he stood outside her apartment door, the worn carpet and peeling wallpaper, a stark contrast to his immaculate black suit. "Stay back," he ordered his men in a low voice that left no room for argument. They retreated without question, knowing better than to challenge him. He tucked the photo into his pocket, his mind cataloging the details of his target. Vera Rossi. Single mother, waitress, a loose end that needed tying up, according to his business partner. But something about this particular task felt different. The sound of a child's laughter drifted through the thin walls, followed by a woman's gentle voice. Luca's hands clenched into fists. Women were manipulators, users. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. Yet he couldn't shake the strange pull he felt, even just standing outside her door. He didn't knock. With one powerful kick, the door flew open, splintering at the hinges. Vera stood in the narrow hallway, her curves highlighted by the dim light. Her eyes went wide with terror, but she immediately stepped in front of what must have been her son's bedroom door. The protective stance stirred something in Luca's chest. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking but defiant. "Get out!" Luca moved closer, towering over her. Most women cowered before him, but this one. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze despite her fear. It both irritated and fascinated him. "You're coming with me?" he said coldly. "Pack what you need. You and your son are under my protection now." "Like hell we are," Vera spat back. Luca's hand shot out, gripping her chin. "This isn't a request, Bella. You're mine now. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." He saw the moment realization hit her. There was no escape. But even then, that spark of defiance remained in her eyes. It made his blood burn in a way he hadn't felt in years. A small voice called out from behind the door. "Mommy?" Vera's entire body tensed. Luca released her chin but moved closer, his lips nearly touching her ear. "Pack, now, or I'll have my men do it for you." He watched as tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she straightened her spine and met his gaze one more time. "If anything happens to my son, no harm will come to him." Luca cut her off. "You have my word." It was the first promise he'd made to a woman in years. He told himself it meant nothing. But as he watched her disappear into the bedroom to pack, that pull in his chest grew stronger. This woman was different, and that made her dangerous. Vera's heart hammered against her ribs as she stared up at the towering figure of Luca Moretti. Her hands trembled, but she balled them into fists at her sides. "Get out of my home," she demanded, her voice shakier than she would have liked. "I don't want anything to do with you or your world." Luca's cold laugh sent chills down her spine. He looked at her like she was a child throwing a tantrum, his dark eyes gleaming with amusement. When she tried to push against his chest, he didn't budge an inch. Instead, he caught her wrist in an iron grip. "You think you have a choice?" His voice was soft, dangerous. "Your ex-husband made sure you became my problem the moment he opened his mouth about things he shouldn't have known." Vera yanked her arm free, backing away until she hit the wall. "I haven't spoken to him in months. I don't know anything." "Enough." The single word cut through the air like a blade. Luca stalked toward her, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. "You're a loose end, Kara. And in my world, loose ends get tied up one way or another." The threat in his words was clear. Vera's eyes darted to Tommy's bedroom door, her maternal instincts screaming at her to protect her son. Luca tracked her gaze, his expression softening for just a fraction of a second before hardening again. "The boy comes too. You'll both be safer under my protection." "Protection?" Vera laughed bitterly. "You mean your control. Call it what you want." His massive frame blocked out the dim light from the hallway. "But you're coming with me, now." Vera looked around her small apartment, at the worn furniture and faded wallpaper. She thought about running, about screaming for help, but the cold calculation in Luca's eyes told her it would be useless. She was trapped in his web, and there was no fighting her way out. "Let me pack some things for Tommy," she whispered, defeat settling heavy in her chest. Luca nodded once. His victory, absolute. 5 minutes. "Don't try anything stupid." As Vera moved to gather their belongings, she felt his eyes following her every move. She knew in that moment that her life as she knew it was over. Whatever game her ex-husband had played, she and Tommy were now pawns in it, and Luca Moretti held all the cards. The black SUV pulled up to iron gates that stretched toward the darkening sky. Vera clutched Tommy closer to her side as she stared through the tinted windows at Luca Moretti's mansion. The sprawling estate looked like something out of a movie, all stone and glass and menace. Luca sat across from them, his presence filling the vehicle with an oppressive tension. He hadn't spoken a word during the drive, but his dark eyes hadn't left Vera for a moment. The gates swung open silently, and the car wound its way up the long driveway, lined with perfectly manicured hedges. Tommy pressed his face against the window, his eyes wide with wonder. "Mama, it looks like a castle," he whispered. Vera's heart clenched. This was no fairy tale castle. It was a fortress, and they were prisoners, not guests. As they stepped into the grand foyer, Vera felt immediately out of place. Her worn waitress uniform and scuffed shoes seemed to mock her against the marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The air itself felt expensive, heavy with the scent of leather and polish. Luca moved through his domain like a predator, each step calculated and commanding. Men in dark suits melted away as he passed, their eyes downcast. Vera watched him, trying to understand how someone could embody such dangerous grace. "Your room is upstairs," he said finally, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You'll find everything you need there." "And if I don't want to stay?" Vera challenged, though her voice shook. Luca turned, his eyes flashing. "That's not an option." He gestured to a maid. "Show them to the blue suite." The maid nodded quickly and led them up a sweeping staircase. Vera counted 3 turns and 2 corridors before they reached a heavy wooden door. The suite inside was bigger than her entire apartment, decorated in shades of blue and silver. "Wow!" Tommy ran to the window, pressing his hands against the glass. "Look at the pool, Mama." But Vera barely heard him. She was watching Luca in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame. His expression was unreadable as he studied them both. "Get comfortable," he said. "You'll be here for a while." The door closed with a decisive click, and the sound of a key turning made Vera's stomach drop. She rushed to the door, trying the handle. Locked. They were trapped in this beautiful prison, at the mercy of a man who hated women and killed for a living. Vera leaned against the door, her mind racing. She'd survived her ex-husband's abuse. She'd built a life from nothing. She would find a way out of this too. She had to. For Tommy. But as she looked around the opulent room, noting the cameras in the corners and the sheer drop outside the windows, she realized escape wouldn't be easy. Luca Moretti hadn't become the most feared man in the city by being careless. She'd have to be smarter, more careful, and above all, she'd have to keep her growing awareness of him. The way his presence made her pulse quicken, the dangerous appeal of his authority, locked away where it couldn't hurt her. Because in Luca Moretti's world, weakness meant death. And Vera had too much to lose. Sunlight streamed through the floor to ceiling windows of Luca's dining room, but the warmth couldn't pierce the chill that had settled in Vera's bones. A spread of fresh pastries, fruits, and steaming coffee covered the massive mahogany table, a feast that made her small apartment's breakfast nook look like a joke. Tommy sat beside her, his eyes wide as he took in the elaborate breakfast. At least he seemed happy, already diving into a chocolate croissant with childish abandon. Vera's own stomach churned, her appetite nowhere to be found. She felt Luca's presence before she saw him. He stood in the doorway, his dark suit perfectly tailored, his face an expressionless mask as he watched them. His gaze felt like ice on her skin. "Eat," he commanded, his voice carrying across the room. Vera's hand trembled as she reached for a piece of toast. "I'm not hungry." That wasn't a request. His words carried a dangerous edge. She forced herself to take a bite, the food tasting like ash in her mouth. Tommy looked up from his croissant, his face smeared with chocolate, and pulled out one of his crumpled drawings from his pocket. "Mommy, look what I made at school yesterday," he said, smoothing the paper on the table. Vera focused on the colorful scribbles, grateful for the distraction from Luca's penetrating stare. "It's beautiful, baby." "Is that our house?" "Yeah, and that's you, and that's me, and when you're finished," Luca cut in, his voice sharp, "come to my office. We need to discuss some matters concerning your ex-husband." Vera's head snapped up, meeting his cold gaze. The mention of her ex made her blood run cold. Now, he turned and stalked away, his footsteps echoing through the mansion. Vera hugged Tommy close, breathing in his innocent scent of chocolate and childhood. "Finish your breakfast, sweetheart. I'll be right back." She followed Luca's path to his office, her heart pounding with each step. The massive wooden door stood open, revealing him behind an imposing desk. Papers were spread before him, photographs, documents, things that made her stomach twist. "Close the door," he ordered without looking up. Vera did as she was told, feeling the click of the latch like a prison cell closing. "Your ex-husband," Luca began, his voice devoid of emotion, "has been playing a very dangerous game, one that's put you and your son in the crosshairs of some very powerful people." He pushed a photograph across the desk. Vera's hands shook as she picked it up, recognizing her ex-husband with men she'd never seen before. "You're now part of something much bigger than yourself," Luca continued, his dark eyes boring into her, "and there's only one way out." "Which is?" Vera's voice came out barely above a whisper. A cruel smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Through me." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with threat and promise. Vera felt the walls closing in, understanding with crystal clarity that her old life was gone. She was in Luca Moretti's world now, and there was no escape. The morning sun filtered through the mansion's pristine gardens, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. Vera sat on a stone bench, her fingers absently tracing the intricate patterns carved into its surface. The roses bloomed around her in deep crimson, their beauty a stark contrast to the gilded prison she now found herself in. She pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, trying to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. 2 days. It had been 2 days since Luca Moretti had turned her world upside down, and she still couldn't make sense of any of it. The crunch of expensive shoes on gravel made her spine stiffen. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. His presence alone changed the air around her, made it heavier, more dangerous. "You'll join me for lunch," Luca said. Not a question, not an invitation, a command. Vera lifted her chin, meeting his cold gaze. "Do I have a choice?" His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You always have a choice, Bella, but only one of them is wise." The dining room was too large for just 2 people, the table stretching out like a mahogany sea between them. Vera watched as servants placed dish after dish before them, the smell of expensive Italian cuisine filling the air. Luca hadn't taken his eyes off her since they'd sat down. "Eat," he ordered, his voice soft but brooking no argument. Vera picked up her fork, feeling like a puppet on strings. "Why am I really here, Mr. Moretti?" "Luca," he corrected, taking a sip of wine. "And you're here because I say you are." She set her fork down with a quiet clink. "That's not an answer." His eyes darkened, and he leaned forward, closing the distance between them. "You're here because you're mine now. Under my protection, under my control, under my rules." His words sent a shiver down her spine. "The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." "I don't belong to anyone." Vera shot back, her voice stronger than she felt. "Especially not to someone who thinks they can own people." Something flickered in his expression. Interest, perhaps, or amusement. He reached across the table, his fingers catching her chin. "Your defiance is entertaining. But make no mistake, cara mia, you're exactly where I want you to be." Vera jerked away from his touch, but she couldn't escape the heat that bloomed where his fingers had been. She hated how her body betrayed her, how it responded to his proximity, despite everything he represented. "This isn't a game," she whispered. "No," Luca agreed, his voice dropping to match hers. "This is your life now, and I always take very good care of what belongs to me." The threat, or was it a promise, hung in the air between them, as tangible as the crystal glasses and silver cutlery that surrounded them. Vera met his gaze across the table, refusing to look away first. She might be trapped in his world, but she wouldn't let him break her spirit. Not even if part of her wondered what it might be like to surrender to the darkness in his eyes. The evening shadows stretched across the mansion's grounds as Vera crept along the garden wall. Her heart thundered in her chest, each step careful and measured. Tommy was safely asleep, and she'd memorized the guards' rotation patterns over the past few days. This was her chance, maybe her only chance. She made it halfway to the service gate when heavy footsteps crunched on gravel behind her. Before she could run, strong hands grabbed her arms, yanking her backward. "Going somewhere, sweetheart?" One of Luca's men sneered, his grip bruising. Vera fought, kicking and twisting, but another guard appeared, and together they dragged her back toward the mansion. Her struggles were useless against their iron grip. Fear clawed at her throat as they marched her through the ornate halls to Luca's office. He stood at the window, his back to her, tension radiating from his broad shoulders. The guards shoved her forward and left, closing the door with a final click that echoed like a death knell. "I warned you." Luca's voice was deadly quiet. He turned, and Vera's breath caught at the cold fury in his dark eyes. "I told you what would happen if you tried to run." "You can't keep me prisoner forever," Vera spat, even as she backed away from his advancing steps. "Can't I?" His laugh was without humor. He moved like a predator, backing her against the wall. "You still don't understand what I'm capable of, do you?" His hand shot out, gripping her jaw. Vera flinched but met his gaze defiantly. "You're just proving everything I already knew about you. You're a monster." Something flashed in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or rage. Before she could process it, his mouth crashed down on hers. The kiss was brutal, possessive, his anger pouring into her. But beneath the violence was a desperation that made her knees weak. Vera's body betrayed her, responding to his touch even as her mind screamed in protest. His fingers tangled in her hair, holding her in place as he deepened the kiss. She tasted his fury, his need, and something darker that made her tremble. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. Vera touched her tingling lips, horrified by how much she wanted him to kiss her again. "You're mine," Luca growled. His forehead pressed against hers. "The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." Vera stared at him, seeing the dangerous man everyone feared and the broken soul underneath. But she couldn't trust either version of him, not when her heart was already at risk of shattering. Sunlight streamed through the heavy curtains of Vera's room in Luca's mansion, but the warmth did nothing to chase away the chill that had settled in her bones. Her lips still tingled from last night's forceful kiss, a reminder of how quickly Luca could shift from cold calculation to burning passion. She touched her fingers to her mouth, remembering the way he'd claimed her. The memory made her shiver, not entirely from fear. A soft knock at her door startled her. Tommy peeked in, clutching his favorite stuffed dinosaur. "Mama," Mr. Luca made pancakes. Vera's heart clenched. The sight of her son speaking so casually about the dangerous man who held them captive sent warning signals through her body. But what troubled her more was the way Tommy's eyes lit up when he mentioned Luca's name. Following Tommy to the kitchen, Vera froze in the doorway. Luca stood at the massive granite island, his usual sharp suit replaced by a simple black t-shirt that highlighted his muscled arms. He was showing Tommy how to flip a pancake, his normally harsh features softened as he guided her son's small hands. "Like this, little man," Luca said, his voice gentler than Vera had ever heard it. "Nice and easy." Tommy's delighted giggle echoed through the kitchen when the pancake landed perfectly. "Did you see that, Mama?" "I saw, baby." Vera managed, her throat tight with conflicting emotions. Luca's eyes met hers over Tommy's head, and the tenderness she'd witnessed vanished behind his usual mask of control. "Sit," he commanded. "Eat." Throughout breakfast, Vera watched as Luca continued to interact with Tommy, answering the boy's endless questions with unexpected patience. It was like watching a lion playing gently with a lamb, knowing those same deadly claws could tear everything apart in an instant. Later, while Tommy was absorbed in his coloring books, Vera found herself wandering the halls of the mansion. She paused when she heard Luca's voice coming from his office, low and menacing. "That rat bastard thought he could play both sides," Luca was saying. "Marco Rossi was stupid enough to think he could steal from me and get away with it." Vera's blood ran cold. Marco, her ex-husband's name. "He's been moving product through our territory for months," another voice said, using his connection to the woman as cover. "His ex-wife," Luca corrected sharply. Vera had no idea what that piece of shit was doing, but now she's mine to deal with. Vera pressed her hand against the wall to steady herself. This wasn't random. None of it was random. Her ex-husband had used her as a shield for his criminal activities, and now she was caught in Luca's web because of it. She heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly retreated, her mind spinning. She'd thought she was simply collateral damage in some Mafia power play, but the truth was far worse. She'd been a pawn in this game long before Luca kicked down her door. Back in her room, Vera sank onto the bed, her hands trembling. The danger wasn't just about escape anymore. It was about survival. And the most terrifying part wasn't Luca's violence or his control. It was the way her heart raced when he looked at her, the way her body responded to his touch, and how she couldn't stop thinking about that kiss. She was falling for the very man she should fear most. The morning sun cast long shadows through the mansion's windows, but the darkness that crept into Vera's heart had nothing to do with the light. Her ex-husband's black Mercedes pulled up to the gates, and her stomach twisted into knots as she watched from the second-floor window. Tommy was playing in the garden with one of Luca's guards keeping watch. She needed to get to him before Marcus, her ex, could lay eyes on their son. "He's not supposed to be here," she whispered, her hands trembling against the window pane. "No, he's not." Luca's cold voice came from behind her. She hadn't heard him approach, but his presence filled the room like smoke. "Stay here." "Luca, please. Marcus is dangerous when he's angry. I need to get Tommy." I said, "Stay here." His tone left no room for argument. "Tommy is already being moved to the safe room." Through the window, Vera watched Marcus step out of his car. Even from this distance, she could see the rage in his stance. He was wearing an expensive suit that didn't quite fit, trying to look the part of a made man but failing miserably. Luca's hand settled on her shoulder, heavy and possessive. "Watch," he commanded. "Watch what happens when someone threatens what's mine." The scene unfolded like a nightmare in slow motion. Marcus burst through the front doors, his voice echoing through the mansion. "Where is she? Where's my wife?" "Ex-wife," Luca corrected as he descended the grand staircase, his movements deliberate and predatory. "And she's under my protection now." Marcus sneered, pulling out a gun with shaking hands. "You don't know what you're dealing with, Moretti. I've got connections." "With the Colombians?" Luca's laugh was chilling. "The same ones who want you dead for stealing from them?" The color drained from Marcus's face. "That's not—" "You're right about one thing," Luca continued, moving closer. "I do know exactly what I'm dealing with. A pathetic excuse for a man who beats women and threatens children." "Tommy is my son!" Marcus roared, his finger tightening on the trigger. What happened next was so fast Vera could barely process it. Luca moved like a shadow, disarming Marcus with brutal efficiency. The gun clattered to the floor, and Luca's fist connected with Marcus's jaw with a sickening crack. "He was your son," Luca snarled, pinning Marcus against the wall. "Before you chose drugs and violence over him, before you made Vera live in fear." Marcus spat blood. "You can't." The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Vera flinched, but couldn't look away as Marcus slumped to the floor, a red stain blooming on his chest. Luca stood over him, his gun still smoking. "I can do whatever I want." He knelt down beside Marcus's dying form. "And right now, I want you to understand something before you die. Vera and Tommy, they're mine now, and I protect what's mine." Vera pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She should have been horrified, should have been running. Instead, she felt something else. A dark, twisted relief. For the first time in years, she felt truly safe. Luca looked up at her, his eyes cold but somehow burning with intensity. Blood spattered his pristine white shirt, but he didn't seem to notice or care. "It's done," he said simply. And in that moment, Vera knew there was no going back. She was bound to this dangerous man who had just killed for her, killed to protect her and Tommy. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it made her feel powerful. Vera stood at the window of Luca's mansion, her fingers pressed against the cold glass. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn where, just hours ago, her ex-husband had threatened her son's life. Her hands trembled as she remembered the way Luca had moved, swift, lethal, precise. One moment her ex had been screaming threats, the next he was silent forever. The violence should have revolted her. It should have sent her running for the hills with Tommy clutched to her chest. Instead, she found herself rooted to the spot, her heart racing for reasons she didn't want to examine too closely. She watched Luca's reflection in the window as he paced the garden below, barking orders into his phone. Even from this distance, his presence commanded attention. His broad shoulders were tense beneath his tailored suit, and his movements held the dangerous grace of a predator. Blood still stained his white shirt cuff, a reminder of what he was capable of. "Mommy?" Tommy's small voice drew her attention. "Can we have pizza for dinner?" Vera forced a smile, turning away from the window. "Sure, baby. Why don't you go pick out a movie to watch while we eat?" As Tommy scampered off, her eyes drifted back to Luca. He had stopped pacing and was staring directly up at her window. Even from here, she could feel the weight of his gaze. It sent shivers down her spine, not entirely from fear. The sound of his footsteps in the hallway made her pulse quicken. When he entered the room, the air seemed to thicken. He'd rolled up his sleeves, revealing strong forearms marked with old scars. His presence filled the space, making her feel small and vulnerable. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low and steady. "No one will ever threaten you or Tommy again." Vera wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold onto her resolve. "Safe? I'm your prisoner, Luca. That's not safety, that's just trading one cage for another." He moved closer, and she could smell his cologne mixed with something metallic. His dark eyes held hers, and she saw something flicker in their depths. Possession, desire, maybe even a hint of tenderness. "You're not my prisoner, Vera." His hand came up to brush her cheek, and she hated how her body leaned into his touch. "You're mine to protect. There's a difference." But as he left the room, Vera knew better. The bars of this gilded cage might be prettier than the ones she'd left behind, but they were bars all the same. And the most dangerous part wasn't the cage itself. It was how part of her was starting to want to stay in it. The mansion felt different after the bloodshed. Vera noticed it in the way the servants scurried past certain rooms, in the lingering smell of industrial cleaner that couldn't quite mask what had happened. But most of all, she noticed it in Luca. He was everywhere now. At breakfast, His dark presence would fill the dining room as he sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim of his cup. During the day, he'd materialize in doorways or hallways, his cold eyes following her movements. At dinner, he insisted she join him, even when she tried to eat earlier with Tommy. The meals were the worst. Silence stretched between them like a living thing, broken only by the clink of silverware against fine china. Yet sometimes, when she dared to look up, she caught something in his expression that made her pause. A softness around his eyes, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. One evening, as Tommy played with his toys in the corner of the dining room, Luca actually smiled at something the boy said. It wasn't much, just a slight upturn of his lips, but it transformed his face completely. For a moment, he looked almost human. "He reminds me of someone I knew," Luca said quietly, the words seemingly surprising. Even him. Vera's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. It was the first personal thing he'd ever shared. But then his walls slammed back up, his expression hardening into its usual mask of indifference. The moment passed, leaving Vera more confused than ever. The questions burned inside her until she couldn't take it anymore. That night, after putting Tommy to bed, she found Luca in his study. He sat behind his massive desk, the lamp casting shadows across his face. "Why am I really here?" Vera demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. "Why not just kill me like you did him?" Luca's head snapped up, his eyes darkening. He rose slowly, moving around the desk until he stood before her. "You think I keep you here because I want to kill you? I think you keep me here because you can," she shot back. "Because you're used to having power over everyone and everything." Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe. Or recognition. His jaw clenched, and for a moment, Vera thought he might lash out. Instead, he turned away, running a hand through his dark hair. "You don't understand anything," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Then, help me understand." Vera pressed, taking a step closer. "Why me? Why us?" When Luca turned back to face her, something had changed. The cold mask had slipped, revealing glimpses of the man beneath, wounded, vulnerable, human. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, Vera saw past the monster everyone feared. "Because," he said quietly, "you're the first person who's looked at me and seen something worth saving." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Before Vera could respond, Luca's expression closed off again, but it was too late. She'd seen the truth, the cracks in his carefully constructed armor, and now she couldn't unsee them. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, turning back to his desk. But as Vera left the study, she knew something had shifted between them. The monster had shown her his heart, even if just for a moment, and nothing would ever be the same. Dangerous Desire's prison, watching the sun set behind the sprawling mansion grounds. Her fingers traced the cool glass, her mind wandering to thoughts she shouldn't be having, thoughts of Luca. The way his presence filled every room, how his dark eyes followed her movements, the rare moments when his mask slipped and revealed something raw underneath. She hated herself for it. The sound of footsteps behind her made her spine stiffen. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. Her body had learned to recognize his presence, like prey sensing a predator. "You're thinking too hard." Luca's voice cut through the silence, deep and smooth as whiskey. Vera crossed her arms, trying to hold herself together. "What else am I supposed to do when I'm kept here against my will?" He moved closer, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Is that what this still is to you? Prison?" His question made her turn, a mistake she realized too late. He stood closer than she expected, his tall frame blocking out the fading light. In the shadows, his features were softer, more human. "I've seen what you do to people. she whispered, her voice trembling. "The violence, the control. And yet you're not running." His eyes searched her face. Not anymore. She swallowed hard, knowing he was right. The past few days, she'd stopped looking for escape routes, stopped planning her way out. Instead, she found herself watching him, the gentle way he spoke to Tommy, the rare smile that transformed his face, the moments of vulnerability that slipped through his armor. "I don't understand you," she admitted. "One minute you're threatening people's lives, the next." "The next?" His voice dropped lower, and he took another step forward, Vera's back pressed against the window. "The next? You're reading bedtime stories to my son, or asking about my day like you actually care." "Who says I don't care?" His hand came up, fingers brushing her cheek. The touch sent electricity through her body. "Don't," she whispered, but her protest lacked conviction. Luca's eyes darkened. "Tell me to stop," he challenged, his thumb tracing her bottom lip. She should have. God knows she should have pushed him away. Remembered who he was, what he'd done. But when his lips claimed hers, fierce and demanding, her resistance crumbled like a house of cards. The kiss was nothing like their first. This wasn't about power or control. This was need, raw and honest. His hands tangled in her hair as he pressed her against the window, and she found herself responding with equal fervor, her fingers gripping his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Vera saw something in his eyes that terrified her more than any show of violence. Desire, yes, but also something deeper, something that mirrored the dangerous feelings growing in her own heart. "What are you doing to me?" she whispered against his lips. His answer was another kiss, softer this time, but no less devastating. And in that moment, Vera knew she was falling for the devil himself, and she wasn't sure she wanted to stop. The dining room felt different that evening. Gone were the usual tense silences and careful glances. Instead, Tommy's cheerful chatter filled the space as Luca sat at the head of the massive oak table, his dark eyes fixed on the boy with an unexpected softness. Vera watched them from behind her wine glass, her heart doing strange things in her chest. Tommy was explaining his latest drawing to Luca, who listened with the same intensity he usually reserved for his business dealings. "And this is the dragon," Tommy said, pointing to a mass of red scribbles. "He's not mean like other dragons. He protects people." A ghost of a smile touched Luca's lips. "Is that so?" "Yeah, like you protect us." Vera nearly choked on her wine. She set the glass down with trembling fingers. But Luca's attention never wavered from Tommy. "That's very observant of you," Luca said, his voice gentler than Vera had ever heard it. The massive chandelier cast warm light across Luca's sharp features, softening them. For a moment, he looked almost normal, like any man having dinner with a family he cared about. The thought sent a shiver down Vera's spine. After dinner, when Tommy had been tucked into bed, Luca cornered Vera in the hallway. His presence filled the space, dark and commanding as always. But there was something else there now. Something that made her pulse race. "You see it now, don't you?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "How well this works." Vera backed up against the wall, but Luca followed, placing his hands on either side of her head. "This isn't real," she whispered. "Whatever this is exactly what it looks like." His eyes burned into hers. "You're mine now, Vera. You and Tommy both, and I protect what's mine." His words should have terrified her. They should have made her want to run. Instead, they sent heat coursing through her veins. "You can't just own people, Luca." He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "Watch me." Vera closed her eyes, fighting the wave of desire that crashed over her. When she opened them again, Luca was still there, still watching her with that predatory intensity that made her knees weak. "There's no going back," he said. "Not now, not ever." As he walked away, leaving her trembling in the hallway, Vera knew he was right. Whatever happened next would change everything. The scariest part wasn't that she was trapped in his world, it was that she was starting to want to stay. The mansion felt smaller with each passing day. Vera couldn't turn a corner without feeling Luca's presence, couldn't enter a room without catching his scent expensive cologne mixed with something darker, more dangerous. It lingered in the air like a promise or a threat. She wasn't sure which anymore. She found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. The way his shoulders tensed beneath his tailored suits, how his jaw clenched when he was deep in thought. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the dinner table, and the electricity between them would make her breath catch. One evening, as she passed him in the hallway, their arms brushed. It was barely a touch, but it sent heat coursing through her body. Luca paused, his hand reaching out to steady her, and for a moment, time stood still. His fingers burned through the thin fabric of her dress, and she could feel his breath on her neck. "Vera," he whispered, her name like a prayer on his lips. She pulled away, her heart hammering in her chest. "I can't," she said, though she wasn't sure what exactly she was refusing anymore. The days blurred together in a haze of almost moments. His hand on the small of her back as he guided her through doorways. The brush of his fingers against hers as he passed her a glass of wine. Each touch was like a spark to dry timber, threatening to ignite something neither of them could control. That night, Vera needed air. The walls of the mansion felt like they were closing in, and she found herself on the terrace, staring out at the city lights below. The cool night air did little to calm her racing thoughts. She sensed him before she heard him, that predatory awareness that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. His footsteps were silent on the stone tiles, but she knew he was there. "Why do you resist me so much?" His voice was low, dangerous. Before she could answer, his hands were on her waist, spinning her around. His lips crashed into hers, hungry and demanding. The kiss wasn't gentle, it was all need and desperation. Years of loneliness and wanting poured into a single moment. Vera's hands fisted in his shirt, torn between pushing him away and pulling him closer. His tongue swept into her mouth, and she moaned, her resistance crumbling like sand through her fingers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Vera could see the struggle in Luca's eyes. The monster and the man, fighting for control. She touched her lips, still tingling from his kiss, knowing that whatever line they'd just crossed, there was no going back. Vera couldn't sleep. The memory of Luca's kiss burned through her thoughts, making her toss and turn in the silk sheets of her bed. His touch had awakened something in her she thought was long-dead desire, raw and dangerous. Morning came too quickly. She stood at the kitchen counter, absently stirring her coffee, while Tommy ate his breakfast. The mansion was quieter than usual, the silence heavy with unspoken tension. "Mommy, can we go to the garden today?" Tommy asked through a mouthful of cereal. Before she could answer, shouting erupted from outside. The sound of breaking glass shattered the morning peace, followed by gunshots that made her blood run cold. "Under the table, baby! Now!" Vera grabbed Tommy and shoved him beneath the heavy wooden dining table, her heart pounding against her ribs. The door burst open. Two of Luca's men stumbled in, one supporting the other, who was bleeding heavily from his shoulder. Their faces were pale with shock and fear. "Boss!" one of them shouted. "They're here!" Luca appeared in the doorway like a dark angel of death. His usual pristine suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, but his eyes, they were what scared Vera the most. Cold, empty, deadly. "Get them to the safe room," he ordered, nodding toward Vera and Tommy. His voice was eerily calm. More gunshots rang out. Vera clutched Tommy to her chest as one of the guards ushered them toward the panic room. Through the window, she caught glimpses of men in black charging across the lawn. What happened next would haunt her forever. Luca moved like a predator. Each step calculated. When the first attacker burst through the door, Luca didn't hesitate. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. The man dropped, a neat hole in his forehead. Vera wanted to look away, but couldn't. There was something hypnotic about watching Luca work. He was brutal efficiency in motion, taking down 3 more men with the same cold precision. No emotion, no hesitation, just death dealt by skilled hands. When it was over, the marble floor was stained red. Luca stood in the middle of the carnage, adjusting his cufflinks as if he'd just finished a business meeting. He turned to her then, and something in his face shifted. The killer vanished, replaced by the man who'd kissed her last night. He crossed the room in long strides, his hands surprisingly gentle as they cupped her face. "You're safe now," he said softly, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized she'd shed. Vera stared up at him, trembling. This was the man who'd just killed without blinking. Yet his touch was tender, almost loving. The contrast made her dizzy with confusion, and a heated awareness she couldn't deny. "How can you be so different?" she whispered. "One minute you're... This is who I am, Kara." His eyes darkened. "The sooner you accept that, the better." He walked away, barking orders at his men, leaving Vera to wonder if she could ever reconcile the two sides of Luca Moretti, the killer and the man who made her heart race with a single touch. And worse, she wasn't sure which version of him frightened her more. The living room was quiet, except for the soft crackle of the fireplace. Vera sat on the plush leather sofa, watching the flames dance while Luca poured himself a drink at the bar. His shoulders were tense, the weight of the day's violence still clinging to him like a shadow. He looked different now, less the ruthless Mafia boss and more like a man carrying too many burdens. When he finally settled into the armchair across from her, his eyes met hers, with an unfamiliar softness. "You're afraid of me," he said, his voice low and rough. Vera wrapped her arms around herself. "Should I not be? After what I saw today." Luca took a long sip of his whiskey, the amber liquid catching the firelight. "The world I live in, it's not kind to weakness." His jaw tightened. "I learned that lesson the hard way." Something in his tone made Vera lean forward. "What do you mean?" He was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Her name was Isabella." The words seemed to pain him. "I trusted her, loved her." His laugh was bitter. "She was working for my enemies the entire time." Vera's heart skipped. This was the first crack she'd seen in his armor, the first glimpse of the man beneath the monster. "She wasn't the first woman to betray me," he continued, his knuckles white around his glass. "My own mother." He shook his head. "She sold information about my father to his rivals, got him killed." "Luca," Vera whispered, surprised by the sympathy welling up inside her. His eyes snapped to hers, dark and intense. "But you're different." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You challenge me, defy me, and yet..." The air between them grew thick with tension. Vera's pulse quickened as he studied her face. "I can't figure out why I can't stay away from you," he admitted. Vera's hands trembled in her lap. She wanted to reach out to him, to offer comfort, but she knew better. This man was still dangerous, still capable of terrible violence. One moment of vulnerability didn't change that. "We all have scars," she said carefully, "but they don't have to define us." Luca's expression hardened slightly. "In my world, they do." He stood up, towering over her. "The moment you show weakness, you're dead." But as he walked past her toward the door, his fingers brushed her shoulder, the lightest touch, so brief she might have imagined it. Vera shivered, understanding dawning in her heart. The monster wasn't born. He was created. And somewhere, beneath all that darkness, was a man who'd been shattered by betrayal. She watched him leave, her mind spinning. How could she feel such compassion for someone so dangerous? How could her heart ache for the man who'd forced her into this gilded cage? The fire crackled, throwing shadows on the wall, and Vera realized she was treading dangerous ground, because understanding Luca's pain made him human, and a human Luca was far more dangerous than the monster she'd first met. The letter arrived on expensive paper, its elegant script a stark contrast to the vicious threat it contained. Luca's jaw tightened as he read it, his knuckles turning white around the edges of the paper. Vera watched his face transform from controlled indifference to something far more terrifying. "What is it?" she asked, her heart already racing. Luca's eyes met hers, dark and deadly. "They're threatening Tommy." The words hit Vera like a physical blow. Her legs went weak, and she grabbed the nearest chair to steady herself. "Who?" she whispered. "Enemies." Luca crumpled the paper in his fist. "They think they can get to me through you." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his presence filling her space. "They're wrong." Vera watched as he barked orders into his phone, his voice carrying through the mansion's halls. Within minutes, the house was crawling with armed men, their weapons visible beneath tailored suits. "I won't let anyone touch him," Luca growled, his hand cupping her face. His touch was gentle, but his eyes promised violence. "Or you?" Fear clawed at Vera's throat. "What are you going to do? Whatever is necessary." His words were ice-cold, promising bloodshed. For hours, Vera paced the mansion's halls while Luca made calls and issued commands. She kept Tommy close, trying to shield him from the obvious tension in the air. When night fell, she tucked him into bed, her hands shaking as she pulled the covers up to his chin. "Mommy, are you scared?" Tommy asked, his small face serious in the dim light. "No, baby." She lied, smoothing his hair. "Luca won't let anything bad happen to us." After Tommy fell asleep, Vera found herself alone in the hallway. Suddenly, Luca was there, his body pressing her against the wall. His breath came fast and hot against her neck. "I will kill anyone who threatens him," he whispered fiercely. "Anyone who threatens you." Before Vera could respond, his mouth crashed down on hers. The kiss was desperate, hungry, full of unspoken promises and barely contained rage. Vera's hands clutched at his shoulders, her body responding to his despite her fear. For a moment, she lost herself in his touch, in the way his hands branded her skin. Then his phone rang, shattering the moment. Luca pulled away, his eyes still dark with desire and fury. Without another word, he turned and strode down the hall, leaving Vera alone with the taste of danger on her lips and the knowledge that everything was about to change. The library in Luca's mansion was silent, except for the soft rustling of papers. Vera's hands trembled as she sifted through the documents she'd found hidden in one of his desk drawers. Her heart pounded against her ribs as the pieces started falling into place. The timestamps on the surveillance photos told the story. Pictures of her ex-husband, dated weeks before Luca had ever shown up at her apartment. Notes detailing his movements, his habits, his weaknesses. Everything had been mapped out with clinical precision. Vera's stomach lurched. she'd been a pawn all along. The door creaked open, and Vera whirled around to find Luca standing there, his face unreadable. "Find what you're looking for? You knew," she whispered, her voice shaking with rage. "You knew everything about him before you came to my apartment. You planned it all." Luca stepped into the room, his movements measured and controlled. Yes. The single word hit her like a physical blow. Vera grabbed one of the surveillance photos and held it up. "You used me as bait. You needed him to come here, to threaten Tommy, so you'd have an excuse to kill him. I did what was necessary to protect you," Luca replied, his voice cold and flat. Vera laughed bitterly. "Protect me? You manipulated me. You forced your way into my life, made me feel things for you." Her voice cracked. "Was any of it real?" Something flickered in Luca's dark eyes, a hint of emotion that betrayed his stoic facade. He moved closer, and Vera backed away until she hit the desk. "Everything I did was calculated," he admitted. "But what I feel for you..." He paused, jaw clenching. "That was never part of the plan." Vera felt tears burning in her eyes. "How can I believe anything you say?" Luca reached for her, but she jerked away from his touch. The hurt that flashed across his face looked genuine, but Vera couldn't trust her judgment anymore. Everything she thought she knew about him had been built on lies. "You're right not to trust me," he said quietly. "But don't doubt that I would do anything to keep you safe." "Safe?" Vera's voice cracked. "You've made me a prisoner in a world I never wanted to be part of." The silence that followed was deafening. Vera could feel her heart breaking as she looked at the man she'd started to fall for. Seeing him now for what he truly was, a master manipulator who had orchestrated every moment of their relationship. "Get out," she whispered. "Just get out." Luca stood there for a moment longer, his expression torn between his usual cold control and something that looked almost like regret. Then he turned and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Vera slid to the floor, the surveillance photos scattered around her like evidence of her own naivety. She'd let herself believe in the possibility of something real with Luca, even knowing what he was. Now she knew better. But even as anger and betrayal coursed through her, she couldn't ignore the stubborn ache in her chest that whispered of feelings too deep to simply switch off. She was trapped, not just in Luca's mansion, but in her own heart. The mansion felt colder in the days following their confrontation. Vera watched as Luca moved through the halls like a shadow, his presence both overwhelming and distant. He hadn't touched her since that night, hadn't even looked at her directly, but she felt his eyes following her everywhere she went. It started with small things. A new coloring book appeared on Tommy's bed. Fresh flowers showed up in Vera's room each morning. The kitchen was always stocked with their favorite snacks. These weren't grand gestures, they were quiet attempts at something Luca seemed to struggle with: kindness. One afternoon, she found Luca in the garden with Tommy. Her son sat on a bench beside the imposing man, both of them hunched over a paper airplane. Luca's hands, the same ones that had ended lives without hesitation, now moved with gentle precision as he showed Tommy how to fold the corners just right. "Like this?" Tommy asked, his small fingers copying Luca's movements. "Perfect," Luca replied, his voice softer than Vera had ever heard it. "Now watch." He launched the paper airplane, and it soared across the garden. Tommy's delighted laugh echoed through the air, and for a split second, Vera caught something in Luca's expression that made her heart skip a genuine smile. The days began to blur together, marked by these moments of unexpected tenderness. Luca took Tommy to the park, standing guard like a deadly sentinel while her son played. He made sure Vera had everything she could need, from clothes to books to art supplies for Tommy. But his eyes, they told a different story. When he thought she wasn't looking, Vera caught glimpses of a war raging behind that icy exterior. She recognized it because she felt it too, the terrifying pull between what they wanted and what they feared. One night, after Tommy had gone to bed, Vera found herself alone in the library. The sound of footsteps made her turn, and there was Luca, backlit by the hallway lights. He looked different, somehow vulnerable, almost human. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've never." He crossed the room slowly, each step heavy with the weight of his confession. "I've never known love that didn't end in betrayal." Vera's breath caught in her throat. She watched as the mighty Luca Moretti, the man who ruled through fear and violence, finally showed her his deepest wound. "Every woman I've ever." He stopped, his jaw clenching. "They all wanted something from me. Power, money, control." His eyes met hers, and the raw honesty there made her heart ache. "But you look at me like you see something worth saving. And that terrifies me more than anything." "Luca," she whispered, but he wasn't finished. "I don't know how to love without destroying everything I touch." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth. "And I can't destroy you, Vera. I won't." Standing there in the dim library light, Vera felt the walls around her heart beginning to crack. Despite everything he'd done, despite the violence and manipulation, she saw him clearly now, a man who'd never known real love, trying desperately to protect himself from it. And God help her, but she understood. As she looked at him, she saw past the monster to the broken man beneath, and something inside her shifted irreversibly. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken truths and dangerous possibilities. Neither moved, both aware that whatever happened next would change everything. In that moment, Vera realized she was falling for the very man she should fear most, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The moonlight filtered through the mansion's windows, casting long shadows across the library where Vera sat curled up in a leather armchair. Luca had found her there, and instead of his usual commanding presence, he simply settled into the chair across from her, waiting. Her fingers traced the worn edges of an old photo she kept in her wallet. "I used to believe in fairy tale," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Before everything went wrong with David, I thought love was enough to fix anything." Luca's jaw tightened at the mention of her ex-husband's name, but he remained silent, his dark eyes fixed on her face. "I was 19 when we met," Vera continued, her voice trembling. "Just a waitress with big dreams. He seemed so different then. Charming, kind, but that was before." She swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "Before he started dealing with people like you." The words hung heavy in the air between them. Luca leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. For once, his face wasn't a mask of cold indifference. "Tell me," he said softly, and she did. The words poured out of her like a dam, breaking how David's violence had started small, with harsh words and grabbed wrists, then escalated to closed fists and broken promises. How she'd discovered she was pregnant with Tommy and knew she had to protect her baby at any cost. "The night I left," she whispered, "he almost killed me. I had a bag packed for weeks, hidden where he wouldn't find it. When he passed out drunk, I grabbed Tommy and ran." Luca's hands clenched into fists, but his voice remained gentle. "You survived." "I did more than survive," Vera said, lifting her chin. "I built a life for Tommy. It wasn't much, but it was ours, at least until you showed up." Something flickered in Luca's eyes, regret maybe. He stood up and crossed the space between them, kneeling before her chair. His hand reached up, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I'm not him," Luca said quietly. "No," Vera agreed, her heart pounding. "You're something else entirely." He pulled her into his arms then, and she didn't resist. His embrace was warm, solid, nothing like the cruel grip she had remembered from David. Vera felt herself melting against him, her head finding the spot where his neck met his shoulder. They stayed like that for a long time, the silence between them more comforting than any words could be. When Vera finally looked up at him, she saw something new in his eyes, understanding, protection, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. Later that night, as they lay together on the library's leather couch, Vera's head resting on Luca's chest, she listened to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her arm, and for the first time since he'd forced his way into her life, she felt truly safe. "What are we doing?" she whispered into the darkness. Luca's hand stilled for a moment. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "But I know I can't let you go." Vera closed her eyes, knowing she should be frightened by those words. Instead, they wrapped around her like a blanket, warm and secure. She was falling for him, the very man she should fear most, and somehow it felt like coming home. Vera stood at the window of Luca's study, watching the sun set behind the mansion's iron gates. Her reflection stared back at her, and she barely recognized the woman she'd become. Gone was the fearful waitress, replaced by someone caught between two worlds, the safe, simple life she once knew, and the dangerous, intoxicating realm of Luca Moretti. "You're thinking too hard again." Luca's voice came from behind her, deep and knowing. She didn't turn around. "How can I not?" His footsteps were silent on the thick carpet as he approached. When his hands settled on her shoulders, she couldn't help but lean back into his touch. The warmth of his chest against her back sent shivers down her spine. "Fight it all you want," he murmured against her ear. "But we both know you belong here." Vera closed her eyes, fighting the truth in his words. "With a killer? With someone who would kill for you." His grip tightened slightly. "For Tommy." The mention of her son's name made her heart clench. These past weeks, she'd watched Luca with Tommy, teaching him chess, reading stories, showing a gentleness she never thought possible from such a brutal man. A commotion outside broke the moment. Shouts erupted from the grounds, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Luca's entire demeanor changed in an instant. He shoved Vera behind him, pulling a gun from his jacket. "Where's Tommy?" "In his room." The words barely left her mouth before more shots rang out. "Get to the panic room. Now." His voice was ice, his eyes deadly. But before either of them could move, the study window exploded inward. Glass rained down as a black-clad figure burst through. Luca's gun barked twice, but the assassin was already rolling, returning fire. Vera screamed Tommy's name, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. She bolted for the door, but Luca grabbed her arm. "My men will get him," he growled, pushing her behind a heavy desk. More gunfire erupted in the hallway. Vera's heart threatened to burst from her chest as she heard Tommy's terrified cry from somewhere in the mansion. Luca's face transformed into something terrible, all traces of humanity vanishing. He emerged from behind the desk like a demon unleashed, firing with deadly precision. The assassin went down, but Luca didn't stop. He emptied his clip into the man's body, each shot punctuating his rage. "Luca!" Vera's voice finally broke through his fury. "Tommy!" He snapped back to himself, grabbing her hand. They raced through the mansion's corridors, stepping over bodies of Luca's men and would-be killers. When they found Tommy, he was safely surrounded by Luca's most trusted guards, terrified but unharmed. Vera swept him into her arms, sobbing. Luca stood over them both, his gun still ready, his eyes scanning for threats. Later, after Tommy was finally asleep and the mansion secured, Vera sat in Luca's blood-stained study. She watched him issue orders, coordinate with his captains, ensure their safety. The violence she'd witnessed should have sent her running. Instead, she felt something else, a terrible understanding that her heart now belonged to this dangerous man. "This is what loving you costs," she whispered, when they were finally alone. Luca turned to her, his eyes still hard from battle. "Then pay it," he said. "Because losing you isn't an option anymore." Vera looked at her hands, remembering how they'd trembled during the attack. Now they were steady. She was changing, becoming something new, someone who could survive in Luca's world. The question was, could she live with what that meant? The mansion buzzed with activity as Luca's men moved through the halls like angry hornets. Vera watched from Tommy's bedroom window, holding her son close as black SUVs pulled up to the front gates. The sound of gunfire still echoed in her ears from the earlier attack, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Mommy?" Tommy's small voice pulled at her heart. "Are the bad men coming back?" Vera squeezed him tighter. "No, baby. Luca won't let them." She'd seen the rage in Luca's eyes when the assassin had broken in. The way he'd moved without hesitation, his body becoming a shield between the danger and her family. The memory of what followed made her stomach turn. The brutal efficiency with which he'd eliminated the threat. Heavy footsteps approached the room, and Vera tensed until she recognized Luca's familiar stride. He appeared in the doorway, his white shirt spotted with blood, his face a mask of cold fury. "We need to move," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Now." Vera nodded, helping Tommy gather his favorite toys. She could feel Luca's eyes on her, watching her every movement. When Tommy went to grab his backpack, Luca crossed the room in 3 quick strides and grabbed her arm. "I won't let them touch you," he growled, his grip firm but not painful. "Either of you." Vera looked up into his dark eyes, seeing the storm of emotions he usually kept hidden. "I know," she whispered. "That's what scares me the most." His jaw clenched. "I can't lose you, Vera." The words seemed to pain him, like they were being torn from somewhere deep inside. "I've never needed anyone before, but now." He trailed off, his thumb tracing circles on her skin. "The violence will never stop, will it?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Luca's eyes softened slightly. "No, this is who I am, what I am." He pulled her closer, his forehead touching hers. "But for you, for Tommy, I would burn this whole city to the ground." The scary part was, Vera believed him. She'd seen the monster he could be, but she'd also felt the gentleness in his touch, watched him read bedtime stories to Tommy, witnessed the cracks in his armor that only she was allowed to see. "We have to go," he said finally, pulling away. "My enemies will keep coming until they're all dead." Tommy returned with his backpack, and Luca's entire demeanor shifted. He knelt down to the boy's level, his voice softening. "Ready for an adventure, kid?" As they made their way through the mansion's halls, past armed guards and through security checkpoints, Vera felt the weight of her new reality settling on her shoulders. She was bound to this man now, to his world of violence and power. There was no going back to her old life. That door had closed the moment she'd let herself fall for him. Luca guided them to a waiting car, his hand protective at the small of her back. Before they got in, he turned to her one last time. "I know what loving me costs," he said quietly. His words meant only for her. "But I swear, Vera, I will protect what's mine until my last breath." Vera looked at him, this dangerous, broken man who'd claimed her heart despite everything, and knew she was just as lost as he was. "I know," she replied, reaching for his hand. "God help me. I know." Vera paced the length of the safe house's living room, her bare feet padding softly against the cold hardwood floor. The setting sun cast long shadows through the bulletproof windows, and Tommy's soft snores drifted from the bedroom down the hall. It had been 3 days since she'd last seen Luca, and the silence was deafening. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind made her jump. Even with armed guards stationed outside, she felt exposed without Luca's presence. "Mommy?" Tommy's sleepy voice called out. Vera forced a smile onto her face and went to him. "Hey, baby, did you have a good nap?" Tommy rubbed his eyes. "When is Luca coming back?" The question hit her like a punch to the gut. In just a few short weeks, Luca had become such a constant in their lives that even Tommy felt his absence. "Soon, sweetheart. He's just taking care of some business." Business. Such a simple word for the violence she knew was happening out there. The thought of Luca, covered in blood, dealing death to his enemies, made her stomach turn. Yet somehow, that same man had held Tommy so gently, had looked at her with such tenderness. Night fell, and after tucking Tommy back in, Vera sat in the darkness of the living room. Her phone lay silent on the coffee table. No messages, no calls. She knew better than to try reaching out. Luca had made it clear. Radio silence was necessary for their safety. The lock clicked, and Vera's heart jumped into her throat. She spun around just as Luca's tall frame filled the doorway. He looked exhausted, his usually immaculate suit wrinkled, but his eyes found her immediately. Without a word, he crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. The familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something metallic. Blood, she realized with a shudder, but she couldn't pull away. Her body melted against his, betraying every all rational thought in her head. "I'm not letting you go. Not ever," he whispered into her hair, his voice rough with emotion. Vera's hands fisted in his jacket. "The things you do, Luca, the violence, it's all for you." His grip tightened. "Everything I do is to keep you and Tommy safe." She pulled back just enough to look into his eyes, searching for the monster everyone claimed him to be. Instead, she found something that terrified her even more: love, possessive, and all-consuming. "What if the price is too high?" she whispered. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing across her cheek. "There is no price too high when it comes to protecting what's mine." The words should have frightened her, should have sent her running. Instead, they settled into her bones like a dark promise, and Vera knew she was lost. She had fallen for a man who dealt in death, who killed without remorse, who loved with the same intensity that he destroyed. And God help her, she couldn't walk away. The safe house felt like a prison, even if it was decorated with expensive furniture and filled with modern amenities. Vera paced the living room, her fingers twisting the hem of her shirt as she watched Tommy color at the coffee table. The sound of his crayons scratching against paper was the only noise breaking the heavy silence. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "He's not who you think he is. The betrayal runs deeper than you know." Vera's hands trembled as she read the message again. Her throat tightened, and she glanced at Tommy, making sure he was still absorbed in his drawing. "Mommy, look!" Tommy held up his artwork. Stick figures of himself, Vera and Luca, standing in front of what looked like their new home. "Do you think Luca will like it?" Her heart clenched. "Of course he will, baby." She forced a smile, trying to hide the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. The guards outside patrolled the perimeter, their shadows passing by the windows in regular intervals. They were supposed to make her feel safe, but after that message, every face seemed suspicious. Every movement felt threatening. Hours later, as thunder rolled across the sky, Luca arrived. His presence filled the room like a dark cloud, his expensive suit splattered with rain. His eyes found hers immediately, and the intensity in them made her shiver. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and controlled. After making sure Tommy was occupied with his toys, they moved to the study. Luca closed the door behind them, his movements deliberate and precise. "Your ex-husband wasn't working alone," he said without preamble. "Someone in my inner circle has been feeding information to my enemies." Vera's breath caught. "The message," she whispered. Luca's eyes narrowed. "What message?" She showed him her phone, watching as his jaw clenched. His fingers tightened around the device until his knuckles turned white. "I'm moving Tommy to a different location," he announced. "Tomorrow morning." "No!" The word burst from her lips. "You can't separate us." "I can and I will." His voice was steel. "It's not safe here anymore." Vera felt the world tilting beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew about Luca, about their situation, seemed to crumble. Was he protecting them, or was this another manipulation? The love she felt for him warred with her maternal instincts. "I won't let you take him," she said, her voice shaking but determined. Luca stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You don't have a choice, Kara." His hand cupped her cheek, gentle despite his harsh words. "I won't risk either of you." Tears burned in her eyes as she realized she was trapped between two impossible choices. Trust the man she'd fallen for, or protect her son at all costs. The weight of her decision pressed down on her chest like a stone. "How do I know you're not the one I should be afraid of?" she whispered. Something flickered in Luca's eyes. Pain, maybe, or anger. But before he could respond, gunshots shattered the night air. The decision was about to be made for them. Luca's footsteps echoed through the marble halls of the mansion, his presence sending ripples of tension through everyone he passed. His face was a mask of cold fury as he gathered his men in the grand study, his voice cutting through the air like steel. "We have a rat," he announced, his hands clasped behind his back as he paced. "And tonight, we're going to flush them out." Vera watched from the doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs. The man before her wasn't the same one who'd held her tenderly just nights before. This was the monster everyone feared. The ruthless Mafia boss who'd built his empire on blood and bodies. His men nodded silently, their faces grim, as Luca laid out his plan. Each word that fell from his lips was calculated, precise, a death sentence waiting to be carried out. "No one threatens what's mine," he growled, his dark eyes flickering briefly to where Vera stood. "No one." Vera's stomach churned. She'd seen glimpses of his violence before, but this was different. This was cold, premeditated brutality. She thought of Tommy, safely hidden away, and wondered if she'd made the right choice in letting herself fall for a man like Luca. The meeting ended, and his men filed out, leaving them alone. The tension crackled between them like lightning before a storm. "You can't keep doing this," Vera whispered, her voice trembling. "This endless cycle of violence. It has to stop." Luca turned to her slowly, his expression unreadable. "This is who I am, Kara. This is the world you chose." "No." She stepped forward, her chin lifted in defiance. "I chose the man who holds Tommy when he has nightmares. The man who kisses me like I'm something precious. Not this. This monster." His jaw clenched. "They're the same person. Then I have to leave." The words hurt coming out, but she forced them anyway. "For Tommy's sake. I can't let him grow up in this world of blood and revenge." Luca moved so fast she barely saw him coming. His hands gripped her arms, pulling her against his chest. His eyes blazed with something raw and desperate. "You're not going anywhere." he growled, before crushing his lips to hers. The kiss was brutal, possessive, filled with all the darkness and passion that defined them. Vera melted against him despite herself, her hands fisting in his expensive shirt. When he finally pulled back, his breath was ragged against her lips. "You're mine forever, Vera. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." Staring into his eyes, Vera saw their future laid out before them, beautiful and terrible, tender and violent. There was no going back now. She was bound to him, to his darkness and his light, for better or worse. And God help her, she wouldn't have it any other way. The sound of gunfire echoed through the mansion's halls. Vera held Tommy close, her hand pressed against his ears as she crouched in the safe room Luca had prepared. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each shot making her flinch. "Mommy, I'm scared," Tommy whispered, his small fingers clutching her shirt. "It's okay, baby. We're safe here." She stroked his hair, trying to keep her voice steady. But she wasn't sure if she believed her own words anymore. Outside, the war raged. Luca's men had engaged the rival faction in a brutal firefight that had turned the pristine grounds of the estate into a battlefield. Through the reinforced windows, Vera caught glimpses of bodies falling, of men she'd seen at breakfast now, lying motionless on the manicured lawn. And there was Luca, moving like a demon through the chaos. His expensive suit was splattered with blood, his face set in a mask of cold fury as he executed his enemies with ruthless precision. This was the monster everyone feared, the man who'd built his empire on blood and bones. Yet this was also the man who'd held her at night, who'd shown such tenderness with Tommy, who'd opened his heart to her in ways she never expected. The contradiction tore at her soul. Hours passed like years. When silence finally fell, it was somehow worse than the gunfire. Vera waited, counting her breaths, until the heavy door opened. Luca stood there, his white shirt stained crimson, his eyes still burning with the aftermath of violence. "It's done," he said simply. Tommy ran to him, and Luca's transformation was immediate. The killer vanished, replaced by the gentle protector who scooped up her son with careful hands. "You're safe now, Piccolo, both of you." Later, after Tommy was asleep, Luca found Vera in their bedroom. His knuckles were split and bruised as he reached for her, pulling her into his arms. She could smell gunpowder and blood on him, mixed with his expensive cologne. "I won't apologize for what I am," he murmured against her hair. "But everything I do, every life I take, it's all to keep you safe, to keep our family safe." Vera pressed her face against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I know," she whispered. "That's what scares me the most. She loved him. God help her, she loved this dangerous, complicated man." But as she stood in his embrace, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, she wondered if love alone was enough to build a future on blood-soaked ground. Luca tightened his hold on her, as if sensing her thoughts. "You're mine now, forever," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "No matter what comes next." Vera closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. In his world of darkness and death, she'd somehow become his light. But as the night settled around them, she couldn't shake the feeling that their love would always carry the price of violence. In the quiet aftermath of battle, they held each other, two souls bound together by something stronger than fear, deeper than darkness. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. Vera's hands trembled as she packed Tommy's small backpack in the darkness of their room. The mansion was quiet, too quiet, and every creak of the floorboards made her heart race. She'd waited until the guards changed shifts, knowing this might be her only chance to escape. Tommy slept peacefully in his bed, unaware of his mother's internal struggle. Vera watched him breathe, each rise and fall of his chest reminding her why she had to leave. The violence of Luca's world was consuming them, and she couldn't bear the thought of Tommy growing up surrounded by death and danger. But leaving Luca, the thought alone made her chest ache. Despite everything, the brutality, the control, the fear, she'd fallen for him hard. She loved the way his cold exterior melted when he was with Tommy, how his touch could be so gentle, despite his capacity for violence. Going somewhere? Luca's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. Vera's blood ran cold as she turned to face him. He stood in the doorway, his massive frame blocking any hope of escape. His face was a mask of fury, but his eyes, God, his eyes held something else. Pain, raw and deep. "I have to," Vera whispered, careful not to wake Tommy. "This life, I can't do this anymore. Every day, I wake up wondering if it's going to be the day someone kills you, or worse, tries to hurt Tommy to get to you." Luca moved closer, his steps measured and predatory. "You think I'd let anyone touch you? Or him?" His voice was low, dangerous. "You're mine, Vera. Both of you." "That's the problem." Vera's voice cracked with emotion. "We're not possessions, Luca. We're people, and I'm terrified that one day your enemies will prove stronger than your protection." Luca reached for her, his large hands gripping her arms. The touch was firm but not painful. Never painful. Not with her. "I would burn this whole fucking world down before I let anyone harm you or Tommy." Tears spilled down Vera's cheeks, and that's what scares me the most. The man I've fallen in love with is capable of such darkness. The admission hung between them, heavy with meaning. Luca's grip loosened, and something in his expression shifted. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked vulnerable. "Love?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Vera nodded, unable to deny it any longer. "Yes. God help me, I love you. But I can't." Luca pulled her against his chest, cutting off her words. His heart thundered beneath her ear, a reminder that beneath all his power and violence, he was still human, still capable of feeling. "Then stay," he whispered into her hair. "Stay, and I swear to you, I'll find a way to keep the darkness from touching Tommy, from touching us." Vera closed her eyes, breathing in his scent. She knew she should run, should take Tommy far away from this dangerous world. But as Luca held her, she realized something else she didn't want to. Despite everything, despite all the reasons to leave, her heart had already chosen its home. "Promise me," she whispered against his chest. "Promise me you'll always protect him first, before me, before yourself, before everything." "I promise." His words were solemn, a vow sealed with the press of his lips against her forehead. "You and Tommy are my family now, and family is everything." In the quiet of the room, with Tommy sleeping peacefully nearby, Vera finally surrendered to the truth she belonged with Luca, in this beautiful, terrible world he'd created. For better or worse, their fates were intertwined now, bound by love and sealed in blood. The morning air was thick with tension as Luca paced his office, his shoulders rigid with barely contained fury. Vera watched from the doorway, her heart pounding as she took in the scene before her. Papers were scattered across his desk, and the crystal tumbler that usually held his whiskey lay shattered on the floor. "It was Marco," Luca said, his voice deadly quiet. "He's been feeding information to our enemies for months." Vera's breath caught in her throat. Marco had been Luca's right-hand man, the one person she thought he trusted completely. "How did you find out?" Luca's jaw clenched. "The money trail." He got sloppy. He turned to face her, and the darkness in his eyes made her take a step back. "He knew about Tommy's schedule, about your safe house." Fear clawed at Vera's chest. She thought of her son, safely tucked away in his room upstairs, completely unaware of the danger that had been lurking so close. Why would he? Money? Luca spat the word like poison. Always fucking money. The sound of screeching tires cut through the air. Luca's head snapped toward the window, and in that instant, everything changed. The first gunshot shattered the morning silence. "Get Tommy and go to the panic room," Luca ordered, already moving toward his desk where Vera knew he kept his gun. "Now!" Vera ran, her feet carrying her up the stairs 2 at a time. Her mind raced with memories of the last time she'd tried to escape this life. But now she was running toward the very danger she'd once fled from. Tommy was awake, his eyes wide with fear. "Mommy? Come with me, baby." She scooped him up, pressing his face into her shoulder as more gunshots rang out below. The sound of breaking glass and shouting filled the mansion. Vera could hear Luca's voice, cold and commanding, directing his men. As she hurried Tommy toward the panic room, she caught glimpses of the chaos through the windows, men in black clothing swarming the grounds, Luca's security forces engaging them in brutal combat. The panic room door sealed behind them with a heavy thud. Through the security monitors, Vera watched as Luca emerged from the house. His movements precise and lethal. He wasn't just fighting, he was hunting. Every shot he fired found its mark. Every move calculated to protect what was his. "Is Luca going to be okay?" Tommy whispered against her neck. Vera held him tighter, unable to look away from the screens. "He's very strong, baby. He'll be fine." But as she watched Luca tear through his enemies with savage efficiency, she saw something else, the way his eyes kept darting toward the wing of the house where she and Tommy were hidden, the desperate intensity with which he fought to keep the attackers away from them. This wasn't just about territory or power anymore. This was about family, about love. Through the cameras, she saw Marco appear at the edge of the property, gun raised. Luca turned, their eyes meeting across the battlefield. In that moment, Vera saw all of Luca's pain and betrayal transform into pure, unstoppable rage. The fight that followed was brutal. Luca moved like a force of nature, absorbing hits that would have dropped other men, pushing through the pain with single-minded determination. When he finally reached Marco, there was no hesitation. No mercy, just the cold efficiency of a man protecting everything he loved. As the gunfire slowly died down and the morning sun painted the battlefield red, Vera understood something fundamental about the man she'd fallen for. Luca Moretti might be a monster, but he was her monster. And in this world of shadows and violence, maybe that was exactly what they needed to survive. Luca's mansion stood silent in the aftermath of the violence. The marble floors, once pristine, now bore the marks of battle. Blood stained the expensive carpets, and the air still carried the acrid smell of gunpowder. But none of that mattered to Luca as he made his way through the wreckage, his thoughts fixed on only one thing: finding Vera. His body ached from the fight, cuts and bruises marking his skin beneath his torn suit. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the fear that gripped his heart. He'd fought like a demon, killed without mercy, all to protect what was his. Now, in the quiet aftermath, he needed to know it hadn't been for nothing. He found her in the safe room, where he'd ordered her to stay with Tommy. His heart clenched at the sight of them. Tommy was asleep on the small cot, his mother's jacket draped over him like a blanket. Vera sat beside him, her fingers gently stroking his hair. She looked up when Luca entered, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "It's over," Luca said softly, his voice rough from exhaustion. "They're all dead." Vera nodded slowly, her hand still resting protectively on Tommy's shoulder. "And your enemies? They won't bother us again." He took a step closer, noting how she tensed but didn't move away. I made sure of it. The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken words. Luca could see the conflict in her eyes, the way she struggled with what she'd witnessed. He'd shown her the darkest parts of himself tonight, revealed the monster that lurked beneath his controlled exterior. "You have a choice," he finally said, his words careful and measured. "You can leave, take Tommy, and go somewhere far away from all of this, from me." The words tasted like ash in his mouth, but he forced them out. "Or you can stay, be mine completely, knowing exactly what that means." Vera stood slowly, careful not to wake Tommy. She approached Luca, her steps hesitant but determined. Up close, he could see the tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "I've seen what you're capable of," she whispered. "The violence, the darkness, it terrifies me." Luca's jaw clenched, preparing for the rejection he knew would destroy him. "But Vera wasn't finished. But I've also seen how you protect what's yours. How you look at Tommy like he's your own son. How you'd burn the world down to keep us safe." She reached up, her fingers gentle against his bruised cheek. "I can't go back to my old life. I don't want to." Hope, dangerous and sharp, bloomed in Luca's chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm yours," Vera breathed, her words both a surrender and a declaration. "All of you. The darkness, the violence, everything. I choose this life. I choose you." Luca pulled her to him, his kiss fierce and possessive. She melted against him, her body fitting perfectly against his like she'd always belonged there. When they finally broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers, his voice rough with emotion. "I'll protect you both until my dying breath," he promised. "No one will ever harm you again." Vera nodded, her fingers curling into his shirt. Behind them, Tommy stirred in his sleep, reminding them both of the precious life they now shared. They had chosen this path together, a path marked by danger and darkness, but also by a love so fierce it could survive anything. In the quiet of the safe room, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, they found their peace. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't safe, but it was theirs. And for Luca and Vera, that was enough. Vera stood at the window of Luca's mansion, watching the sun set over the manicured gardens. The aftermath of violence still lingered in the air, though the grounds had been meticulously cleaned. No trace remained of the bloodshed that had occurred just days ago, but she could still see it every time she closed her eyes. Behind her, Tommy's laughter echoed from another room where he played with his toys, blissfully unaware of the darkness that surrounded them. The sound both comforted and tormented her. How could she justify raising her son in this world of violence and power? Her fingers traced the cool glass, remembering how Luca had looked during the fight, ruthless, terrifying, and yet completely in his element. The image of him standing over his enemies, gun in hand, was burned into her memory. It should have made her run. Instead, it had awakened something primal within her, a mixture of fear and desire that left her breathless. "You're thinking too hard again." Luca's deep voice startled her from behind. Vera turned to face him, her heart racing at his proximity. Even now, after everything they'd been through, his presence commanded every inch of space around him. His dark eyes studied her with that intensity that made her feel both protected and trapped. "How can I not?" she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "The things you do, Luca, the violence." He moved closer, his steps deliberate and predatory. "Everything I do is to protect what's mine." His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing across her cheek. "You and Tommy are mine to protect." Vera leaned into his touch despite herself. "That's what scares me. The way you say mine, like we're possessions. Not possessions, Luca growled softly. My heart, my soul, my reason for breathing. His words sent shivers down her spine. This was the contradiction of loving Luca Moretti, the tenderness wrapped in possession, the protection laced with danger. I see the way you look at me sometimes, he continued, his voice low and intense. Like you're afraid I'll disappear into the monster everyone says I am. Aren't you? Vera challenged, though her voice trembled. The things you've done. For you, he interrupted. Everything I've done has been for you and Tommy. His grip tightened slightly. I won't apologize for protecting what matters most to me. Tears filled Vera's eyes as she placed her hand over his. But at what cost, Luca? When does it end? He pulled her against his chest, and she could feel his heartbeat strong and steady, just like his resolve. It never ends, cara mia. This is who I am. The question is, can you love all of me, the man and the monster? Vera looked up into his dark eyes, seeing both the ruthless mafia boss and the man who'd stolen her heart. The weight of her choice pressed down on her, but she already knew her answer. She'd known it since the moment he'd first claimed her. I already do, she whispered. God help me, but I do. Luca's eyes darkened with possession and promise. I will never let anyone take you from me, he vowed, his words both a comfort and a chain. You're mine, Vera. Forever. As his lips claimed hers in a passionate kiss, Vera surrendered too. The truth she'd been fighting, loving Luca, meant accepting all of him, darkness and all. The weight of that love was heavy, but it was a burden she chose to bear. In his arms, surrounded by his dangerous world, she'd finally found her home. The golden light from crystal chandeliers cast an ethereal glow across the mansion's grand ballroom. Vera stood before a full-length mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back at her. The black designer dress Luca had chosen hugged her curves, making her feel both powerful and exposed. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down the fabric. You look beautiful, cara mia. Luca's deep voice came from behind her. His reflection appeared in the mirror, tall and imposing in his perfectly tailored suit. His dark eyes held that familiar mixture of possession and pride as they roamed over her figure. Why are we doing this? Vera asked, turning to face him. Why now? Luca's fingers traced her jawline, his touch sending shivers down her spine. Because everyone needs to know what you mean to me. His voice was soft, but carried that edge of steel she'd come to know so well. That you're mine. The ballroom filled with the city's most powerful figures, other mafia families, business associates, and politicians who owed Luca favors. Vera felt their curious stares as Luca led her through the crowd, his hand possessive at the small of her back. She recognized the silent questions in their eyes. Who was this curvy single mother who had captured the attention of the notorious Luca Moretti? Tommy had been safely tucked away upstairs with a trusted nanny. But Vera could feel his presence in her heart, reminding her of everything at stake. The life she'd chosen wasn't just about her anymore. It was about both of them, living in Luca's dangerous world. Luca clinked his glass, drawing everyone's attention. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to the powerful man who commanded such respect and fear. But when he looked at Vera, his gaze softened just slightly, a change only she could see. There was a time, Luca began, his voice carrying across the hushed room, when I believed love was weakness, that it was nothing more than a weapon used against men like me. He paused, his eyes never leaving Vera's face. I was wrong. Vera's heart pounded as Luca continued, describing how she'd challenged him, defied him, and ultimately changed him. His words were carefully chosen, maintaining his image of power while making it clear that she held a special place in his world. "Anyone who dares to threaten what's mine," he declared, his tone dropping to that dangerous register that made even hardened criminals shiver, "will learn the true meaning of consequences." The threat hung in the air, clear and deadly. When Luca finished speaking, he pulled Vera close, claiming her lips in a kiss that left no doubt about their relationship. It was a public marking of territory, a declaration that she belonged to him. But beneath the show of dominance, Vera felt the tenderness in his touch, the way his hands trembled slightly against her skin. Later that night, as the guests departed, Vera stood with Luca on the mansion's balcony. The city lights twinkled below them like fallen stars, and the weight of their reality settled around them like a heavy cloak. "I know what this means," Vera said softly, looking up at him. "Being yours publicly, it makes me a target." Luca's arms tightened around her. "Anyone who tries to hurt you will die screaming." His voice was ice, but his touch was fire against her skin. "I will burn this city to the ground to keep you safe." Vera closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. This was the man she'd chosen. Violent, possessive, dangerous, but also the man who looked at her son with genuine affection, who touched her with reverence, who would destroy worlds to protect what he loved. "I'll never leave you," she whispered, the words both a promise and a surrender. "No matter how dark it gets, I'm yours." Luca's kiss was fierce and claiming, a seal on their pact. They both knew there would always be violence, always be danger. But in that moment, with the night wrapped around them like a shroud, their love felt like the only truth that mattered. The storm clouds gathered over the mansion as Vera paced in the study, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. Her mind kept drifting to Tommy, safely tucked away in his room upstairs, still innocent despite the darkness that surrounded them. The past few weeks had changed everything: her heart, her fears, her understanding of what love could be. A commotion outside drew her attention to the window. One of Luca's men burst through the front gates, his car skidding on the wet pavement. Something was wrong. Minutes later, Luca stormed into the study, his face a mask of cold fury. Vera's heart dropped. She knew that look. It meant blood would be spilled. "Marco Salvatore." He spat the name like poison. "He's made his move." Vera's blood ran cold. She'd heard whispers about Marco, an old rival who'd once tried to destroy Luca's empire. What does he want? Luca's jaw clenched. Everything. The territory. The power. His dark eyes fixed on her. "You." The possessiveness in his voice made her shiver. She'd seen Luca's violence, his ruthlessness. But this was different. This was personal. "He thinks taking you will break me." Luca moved closer, his presence filling the room. "He's right." Vera's breath caught in her throat. "Luca, I won't let him touch you." His hands cupped her face, gentle despite the rage in his eyes. "Or Tommy. But I have to end this. Now." She knew what that meant. More violence, more blood. But as she looked into Luca's eyes, she saw something else: fear. Not for himself, but for her. For them. "Do what you have to do," she whispered, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "But come back to me." Luca kissed her then, hard and desperate, like a man going to war. When he pulled away, his eyes were dark with promise. Always. The next few hours were hell. Vera stayed with Tommy, trying to keep her voice steady as she read him stories, all while her phone remained silent. No news from Luca. Then the gunshots started. They echoed in the distance, a symphony of violence that made Vera's heart race. She held Tommy closer, whispering that everything would be okay, praying she wasn't lying. When silence finally fell, it was deafening. The door to Tommy's room opened, and there stood Luca. His suit was splattered with blood, his knuckles raw, but his eyes were only for them. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to his knees before Vera and Tommy. His hands shook as he reached for them, pulling them close. "It's done," he whispered against Vera's hair. "They're all gone. No one will ever threaten what's mine again." Vera felt the tremor in his voice, the vulnerability beneath the power. This was Luca, her Luca. The monster who'd become her protector. The beast who'd learned to love. "We're yours," she whispered back, feeling Tommy's small arms wrap around them both. "Always yours." In that moment, as the last rays of sunset painted the room in gold, Vera understood. This was their life now, beauty and violence, love and power, all wrapped up in the man who held them like they were his salvation. And maybe they were. The morning sun filtered through the mansion's windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Vera stood in the kitchen, watching Tommy eat his breakfast, while Luca's presence filled the doorway behind her. The air between them was different now, charged with something deeper than fear or desire. "Mama, can I go play in the garden later?" Tommy asked, his innocent question breaking through the comfortable silence. Vera glanced at Luca, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, held a warmth that made her heart skip. "Of course, baby," she said, running her fingers through Tommy's hair. "But stay where the guards can see you." It was strange how normal it felt now discussing security measures over breakfast, living in a world where danger lurked just beyond their walls. But Vera had made her choice. The man who stood watch over them might be a monster to the rest of the world. But to her and Tommy, he was their protector, their safety, their home. Luca moved closer, his hand finding the small of her back. The touch was possessive but gentle, a reminder of everything they'd been through. "I have some business to handle," he said quietly. "But I won't be long." Vera nodded, remembering a time when those words would have filled her with dread. Now, she understood that his business was what kept them safe, what allowed them this pocket of peace in a violent world. After Tommy finished his breakfast and ran off to play, supervised by one of Luca's most trusted men, Vera found herself drawn to the terrace. The garden below was beautiful, a stark contrast to the brutality that had brought them here. She watched her son playing, his laughter carrying up to where she stood. Luca appeared beside her, his presence both commanding and comforting. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Sometimes," Vera whispered, "I still can't believe this is our life. Do you regret it?" His voice was low, almost vulnerable, a side of him only she got to see. She turned to face him, taking in the scars that marked his face, the hardness in his jaw that never quite softened. "No," she said firmly. "I chose this. I chose you." His fingers traced her cheek, and she leaned into his touch. Below them, Tommy's laughter echoed again, and Luca's eyes softened as he watched the boy who had somehow worked his way into the heart of a man who claimed not to have one. They stood together as the sun climbed higher, watching Tommy play in the garden that had once felt like a prison, but now felt like sanctuary. Luca's arm tightened around her waist. "You and Tommy are my world now," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I will never let anything hurt you." Vera's heart swelled with love and gratitude. She knew there would always be storms on their horizon. It was the nature of Luca's world. But they had weathered the worst of it together, and they had come out stronger. Their love might be wrapped in darkness, but it burned bright enough to light their way. She leaned into him, accepting the protection of his embrace, the weight of his love. The monster and the woman who tamed him, watching over their son in a garden built on blood and promises. This was their happily ever after, and it was enough.